cheerleaders can go fuck themselves.
Hey, we're back online.
Podcast. Totally went on a rant there unexpectedly during the news and reviews section.
We tapped into something that goes deep and is pretty dark.
Yeah, that's that one's straight from Cthulhu, people. Speaking of which, I've been getting into H.P. Lovecraft. Just found his stuff. It's pretty rad.
Yeah, you're playing a warlock who worships the elder gods, so it's been slowly corrupting your true self. Maybe those chick chacks were right.
Yeah, maybe. Actually, maybe they got causality wrong, the directionality of it, because I actually read the stuff and then made that character. People. Amateur psychologists are some of the most annoying things for me because we use language that's common vernacular. There's analogs to it, like anxiety, for example. People are like, I'm not anxious. I'm like, you know what anxious means to me? Or are you just saying that? Or or OCD, depression, all these things. It's just, I have severe depression. What? Have you been assessed? You're saying you have a depressed mood. That's a thing. You can sense that just by feeling it. But do you have depression? How do you know that? Anyway, whatever. One of those things is directionality of phenomena. So when people like these things are corrupting people, I'm like, is that true? Or are they corrupt? And then that's why they're taking part in it. But
you see there's a comic where this guy goes, I used to think correlation implied causation. Then I took a statistics class. Now I don't. And the girl's like, sounds like the class helped. And he's like, well, maybe.
Yeah. I love it. Good stuff. But this is the Game Theory Podcast. We're talking about classics.
Yes. So this episode idea came while I was in an in-service meeting for teacher training. And we were learning. I teach at a classical academy. There's a big focus on the classics. Moby Dick, Huck Finn, the Iliad, all the classic works of literature. And the speaker was talking about why the classics are important. And the first thing he did was he described his criteria for being judged a classic. And he had a few things. First of all, it had to stand the test of time. So in order to be classic, there could be, like, the new Star Wars movie that's coming out in December might be a classic, but we can't classify it as a classic until we see it through the lens of a few years down the road to make sure it's still relevant, still stands the test of time. The second criteria was that it addresses universal ideas and themes, something that we can relate to as humans, something that will resonate with us. And the third was it needed to be a game changer. It needed to add to the conversation of other works. It needed to contribute to the current conversation of literature. It needed to add something unique to it, right? So with these three criteria, he was able to say, okay, so Twilight, not a classic. Bram Stoker's Dracula may be a classic. We'd have to look at the criteria there. And so as I'm sitting there, Michelle, she was on the podcast, what was it, last week?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
She leans over and she says, what is the classical canon for video games? And I thought that was an interesting question using this criteria. What would we include in the classical canon? Like if I was making a high school curriculum and we had to say, okay, these are the classics. These are what you should know to understand video games. As like these are the must reads. These are the good books, the Goodreads.com of video games. What would they be following that criteria? Do they stand the test of time? So they'd have to be old. It couldn't be anything current generation. It would have to speak to universal themes, whatever that means in the context of video games, and it would need to be some kind of game changer. It needs to add something new to the conversation that wasn't previously being said. So it couldn't be a clone, right? It couldn't be like Joanna Dark, Perfect Dark, because it's so similar to GoldenEye.
Okay.
And so I started thinking of games. So what do you have any other things that you would add to the criteria to add to the video game canon to be considered a classic?
I would just say universally played, maybe. Like,
So,
I know in literature,
it can't be like an obscure thing that not many people have heard of.
Yeah, because I think in classical literature, I'm not sure, but like a lot of it I haven't read. Like Catcher in the Rye, we didn't read that. We read the Great Expectations instead. I remember it was going to be one or the other. Some things like that, but that's only because most people don't read classic books right now. But if video games and TV wasn't around and radio and books was all we had to read, I bet a lot more people would read those things. So if it's like a modern medium, I kind of think it'd have to be widely played, right?
Yeah. So to be a classic, there needs to be some sort of cultural saturation.
Yeah. There you go. That's a good way to say it. Cultural saturation. I also have a cool Batman theory I want to read at some point, which has nothing to do with anything. But I forgot to read this to you before we started. And now we're on the air, and everyone will enjoy it. I guarantee it.
Yes, I think I read that one. It's
okay.
The one about time travel?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so we'll finish up with that.
Okay.
Okay, so using that, I've made a preliminary list, and this is by no means comprehensive. There are going to be games I didn't remember to put on this list because these were just the first 10 or so games that popped into mind that I would include within the classical canon of video games. And for me, it all starts, like, the most classic of classics for me personally is Super Mario Brothers 1. I think
so nothing from the Atari era.
No, I think that the Atari era did add some things, but they don't stand the test of time as well. Like, there's not games that I'm going to go back and play, and they're contributing something to the conversation, but it was just beginning the conversation. So that's like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Yes, it's a classic, but it's not. It's a classic because it's old more than anything else.
So are we doing this chronologically? Should I do one?
Do you have anything from the Atari era?
Yeah, I actually have three.
All right, let's hear it.
One is Pong, because it's the first game that was widely played.
Sure. Yeah, I would include that.
And I could still play Pong, I think. Pac-Man.
Okay.
Because I think that's still, I don't know. Yeah, I play it. There's a 4-man Pac-Man you can play right now at Dave & Buster's. It's some of them. And have you played that?
No.
Oh, each person gets to play, and yeah, it's pretty fun.
Does everyone control a ghost?
Everyone controls a Pac-Man, and I can't remember how it goes. No, I think it's just the regular game, but you're all on one board, and so the ghosts chase you, and so sometimes one person's getting fucked while the other one's looking for something to eat all the ghosts. And
okay,
it's pretty weird, but it was fun. And then lastly, I put actually two. This is an Atari era. Okay, yeah, this is an Atari, but Pole Position, because it's one of the first fun racing games.
Okay,
so I kind of thought that was one.
Yes, and then we moved into the Nintendo era, and that's where Super Mario Brothers 1. It was a game changer. It introduced platform gaming to us, the side-scrolling platformer. Like, every single platform game after that sort of owes its existence to Super Mario Brothers 1.
It was really fun.
Yeah, and does it speak to the universal human condition? Yes, I believe we can all relate to plumbers taking mushrooms and fighting giant dragon turtles to save princesses.
Well, it does sort of the idea that I remember in game. I've brought this up a few different times, but in God of War, the developers said they had a very simple approach to developing games, and they said we want to. Or that's not true, not wholly, but as far as motivation, they said we want to get in and reach and grab into something that everyone can understand. And one of those is the guy took my shit, I want it back. And we can all feel that. And while the princess wasn't Mario's per se as like a possession, there was a sense that, well, no, he was just a hero. But it's this idea that you want to save the day. You want to be something bigger than death, right? It's like existentialism. Right. You want to do something that your name survives you. And that's really what saving a very important person from a very dangerous thing would do. So a princess, so whenever they say like, whenever they kiss or whatever at the end, I guess that is speak to that feminist trope. But other than that, I think it's much more simple than that. You don't have to. Occam's razor suggests it's only about attaining something, like you're surviving your name basically beyond your death. It's just one of these existential huge moments. It could have been a king or a prince, but I think there's some sex involved.
Nice.
So universal appeal maybe.
All right. What else from the Nintendo era? What would you have?
Tetris.
Tetris. Good choice. Why Tetris?
Well, it introduced a new kind of game that I don't think you could play on anything else but a video game. Could you?
This idea of a fast-moving puzzle game.
Yeah, and I think it had universal appeal. It was a lot of people have played it and have had it. And I think if there's a museum of video games that ever happens like 30 years from now, I think it'd make it.
Yeah, it was a surprise hit out of Russia, and it was one of the first. Before gaming became mainstream, it was a very niche hobby, and I think Tetris is one of the games that sort of changed the way people view video games as something that your dad could play, or before the Wii came out, this was something that people's parents would play.
It's like it's a Dr. Mario predecessor,
right?
I know a lot of older people who've played Dr. Mario.
So good. I had next on my list of Nintendo classics, The Legend of Zelda.
Yes. Okay, why?
Okay, so this was, first of all, it's stood the test of time. This is a game that I still go back and play. And I still go back and beat every couple of years or so. This is a game that speaks to universal themes of the need for exploration, the wanting to go out into the wilderness as a kid and explore caves and bomb rocks and see if there's a hidden cave inside of that, or explore dungeons, rescue princesses. All these things are very these are things that resonate. There's a reason this game became incredibly popular. It was also a game changer. It added the conversation to games by two things. First of all, introducing the ability to save your game without a password system. It's one of the first ones that had a built-in battery that would save games. And second of all,
It was gold.
yes, exactly. You could actually, it was made of gold. You could melt it down and finish your house with it. No, secondly, it was one of the first adventure games, one of the first exploration adventure games out there. And that started an entire genre.
That actually struck me. Besides just adventure, wasn't it the first open world game?
Yeah. You could just
go
go
anywhere
and
you
you could
want.
explore it anywhere you want. Go in the dungeons almost any order, you know, like there were a lot of dungeons you could hit in any order. So there was no one holding your hand. This was one of the first games where like it made amateur cartographers out of millions of kids. Just we take out a piece of paper, we start charting out like, okay, this is where this is the Lost Forest, and you kind of like map it out screen by screen.
Yeah, definitely. And the first sense of like an epic game. You know, you get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not really an RPG. You don't gain levels, but you get stronger and stronger and stronger until you could finally beat Ganon. And you couldn't beat him without many of your tools. So, yeah, that's cool. I also was going to say, and I don't remember exactly when this comes out, but Doom. Felt that was a game changer.
Doom.
I was going to say that or Wolfenstein 3D, but I think more people play Doom than Wolfenstein 3D.
Yeah.
So even though Wolfenstein 3D did come out shortly before Doom. But Doom was more than just. So Doom was a few things. You know, I do like first-person shooters, so of course I was thinking of one of the seminal ones. But Doom did a few things. One, it was one of the first 3D games, and it was on the computer, which was more robust at the time than consoles. So it was kind of a rare opportunity. Wolfenstein 3D was one of the very first, and Doom was shortly after. You know, probably I think it was in production when Wolfenstein 3D came out. So it's essentially the same thing. And two, it made it more. Gave a mature feeling to gaming. I think, you know, there's games that came along that were a little mature. Like there was a sex game, Colonel whatever's Last Stand.
Colonel Custer's Last Stand, yeah.
Yeah. But essentially that was a weird game, and that didn't have much popular appeal. But Doom did, and it really helped grow up the genre. It's sort of like when you know, anime came along for cartoons. You know, it's anime can grow up the series, or when Dragon Age came across for Western RPGs, it helped mature the setting, and Witcher 3 for adventure RPGs. It was, you know, there's nudity in it. It's very or Witcher 1, sorry. It's very mature, and so Doom is the same way. And lastly, it hit a cultural chord. It helped introduce gaming to a lot of people, but it introduced misinformation, but it also helped some people clear up misinformation because people began to notice video games like
right. This is where the media started noticing violent video games. This one in Mortal Kombat.
Yeah. So I think it helped, you know, start that conversation with other people and to treat video games like more than just a basement hobby.
Yeah,
maybe.
So my next game from the Nintendo era is Final Fantasy.
Oh, the first one?
Yeah, Final Fantasy 1. This is a game that still holds up. They've re-released it several times with better graphics, but it's still it brought JRPGs as a genre to the country, to the West, and it really felt like a completely different thing. This idea of experience points, of hit points. Like I'd never played Dungeons and Dragons before, so this is my first exposure to role-playing games in general. And you know, there's been better Final Fantasy games out. I think 6 is probably the best in the series, but if I was going to pick like the classic seminal Final Fantasy work, this is kind of the one that started the ball rolling.
Have you played that one?
I have, yeah. Oh. It's pretty hard.
I haven't played it. I was going to say River City Rampage.
Yeah, that one's on mine too. River City Ransom. Or Rampage. Is it Rampage or Ransom?
Oh, shit. Oh, there you go. See? Video game fans, it shows you that. Ransom. You're right. You said Ransom. Okay.
Yeah, Ransom.
That game was really fun. It introduced multiplayer into a beat 'em up, a side-scrolling beat 'em up, which was fun. And even to this day, I can play it. I played it when I was in Iraq with one of my buddies, and we had a great time.
Yeah, Scott Pilgrim versus the World is essentially River City Ransom, but with Scott Pilgrim characters, and it's still like a blast to play. We played that at your house a few years ago.
Yeah, it's just fun.
So yeah, I was going to put Double Dragon, but then I opted for River City Ransom because it also had those elements of improving your stats and like sort of a character building aspect to it that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it was better than like Battletoads or anything like that because of that feeling of, I don't know, RPG or adventure, I guess, obtaining items that made you better. But yeah, very fun, and I felt that was seminal.
I've got one more from the Nintendo era.
All right.
This one is Mega Man.
Oh yeah, Nintendo. Yeah, okay. Why Mega Man if you already had like side scrollers?
Yeah, so I think Mega Man adds enough to the conversation that differentiates it from Mario. The idea of it kind of brought in some of those ideas of building up your character over time, and then a little bit of the open world, like getting to choose which boss you fight at once. So this idea of running, jumping, and shooting with tight controls, but combine that with the feeling of satisfaction you get seeing yourself get new weapons, new power tanks, upgrades. I don't know. It did a twist on the side scroller that I think merits its own genre or category.
That's interesting. As you were talking about that made me think of Metroid, though.
Yes.
It's the same thing, jumping, shooting, obtaining energy cells, and you can save. It's like clearly meant to be played over more than one sitting.
Yes. Metroid's more open world, less level based. It's more of an exploration, like Castlevania is the same kind of game as Metroid. So I don't know. One of those three I would definitely include in the canon.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, and I didn't put Simon's Quest either, which is another one that I don't know if it belongs, but it's that same sort of thing. I loved Simon's Quest. I played it like 6 times. I liked Castlevania, but I only played it after I played Simon's Quest. So.
Yeah, and Mega Man's a game that people are still going through and doing speed runs of. Like it's still being played 20, 30 years later.
Okay.
So anything else from Nintendo era games from you?
No, just the noticeable ones that we didn't have like those, but I can't think of anything else.
Well, moving into Super Nintendo, my first one was Mario Kart.
Really?
Super Mario Kart. Actually, I'm going to hold off on that. I'm going to say Mario Kart 64.
Okay, I was going to say F-Zero.
Okay.
Which is along the same thing. I don't know if I didn't put it. There's a couple I put on here and deleted. Like I said, I put there's one I put Battletoads and Double Dragon, and I actually deleted those because I was like, nah, River City Ransom has got that covered.
Yeah, if we were making a curriculum, I think River City Ransom would cover that.
Yeah, and I think F-Zero, same sort of thing. It wasn't so different than Pole Position that it merits its own thing. It's just a large improvement on it.
Yeah.
And it's just different.
Well, I'm going to say then Chrono Trigger for Super Nintendo.
Really?
The apotheosis. This is if Final Fantasy brought JRPGs to the States, Chrono Trigger perfected them. It was it was different enough from Final Fantasy in that positioning and real time strategy kind of mixed in with the gameplay. The story was better. We've talked about Chrono Trigger a lot, so I don't need to sell you on it. But I would say like that would be among the classics. Like if I was going to sit down my son and say you need to play in order to get the best of all the video games you missed before you were born, Chrono Trigger would be on the top of that list.
Huh. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was going to say Sonic.
Sonic.
That one there. Yeah, it wasn't. The thing is it really didn't open up a new genre, but it did do something radically different, and it did permeate the culture. Like everyone knows who Sonic is, and everybody's played the game.
Does it stand the test of time? Is it a game you can go back and play and still enjoy?
Yeah, but I don't know how much of that is nostalgia because I know the levels. So
yeah,
I know the music, the levels. I know all the little bonuses at this point.
Yeah, I might be willing to include Sonic on there. Sonic.
I just think that it was something that everyone played, and it failed as a genre. You know, this fast-moving exploration. I don't know, adventure. It's not adventure. I don't know what it is, but it failed as a genre. But I think as a experiment, I think it resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah,
because Tetris was its own thing too. It failed as a genre. I mean, Dr. Mario maybe, and then a couple like Flash-based games. But,
Yoshi's Cookie.
Yoshi's Cookie. I don't remember that one.
For another Super Nintendo game that I would put on the list would be Harvest Moon.
Really? Oh yeah, time management.
Yeah, time management games / life simulator games. I feel like Harvest Moon introduced that to the conversation of gaming, and was not only because it can't just be a novel idea, it also needs to be fun. It needs to stand the test of time, and Harvest Moon is still a lot of fun to go back and play.
Yeah, that's a good point. Man, I didn't even think about that one. I'm all out of those, but we're getting up on the era. I added some computer games too that I could add some.
Yeah. Computer games. Go ahead.
One was Half-Life, and this is just getting in the 64 era because Half-Life and GoldenEye were about the same time.
Mm-hmm.
roughly, if my memory serves. And both of these, I thought, what made the FPS genre really take off? Doom, sure, but it wasn't multiplayer. Half-Life was, so was GoldenEye, and I spent a lot of time playing both of those. So it's hard to say. It taught people that you can play games like with a Defense Fortress, I think it was called, in Half-Life. And then Half-Life, the game, was this it was a first-person shooter horror sort of game, which hadn't been done before. And it was this intriguing plot in a first-person shooter. You're like, who's this G-Man? What's going on? Where am I? Who are these Combine people? What the hell is going on? It was really interesting. I think it was seminal. And that or GoldenEye, because GoldenEye also did something similar to that. It was levels-based. It was downright fun. A fun fantasy to live in.
GoldenEye also introduced the 4-player couch co-op shooter thing that was a very big thing for a while.
Yeah, and so I didn't know whether to say the 4-person couch co-op shooter or playing online Half-Life with your friends.
Well, and Half-Life also started introducing the mods that ended up being a very long-lasting part of gaming.
And secondary weapon firing. It wasn't on all the weapons, but it was on your main machine gun. You had a grenade launcher on the bottom of it. That became standard. Your classic weapon has a grenade launcher now. So
I do have one more Super Nintendo game, Street Fighter 2.
Oh, of course.
The fighting game genre had been started before, but never to a point where it would stick around and be a game that people would still want to play today. People still have Street Fighter 2 Turbo Tournament Edition tournaments in their dorms to this day.
Oh yeah, I'd play it right now. Love that game. Oh, and then all the subsequent people that came out, like Fei Long. I love that guy.
Wait. Oh, and from the same time period too, Pokemon Red and Blue.
Really? What's so big about those?
So first of all, the collect them all, getting all 150 Pokemon. That was the idea. Like most RPGs up to that point, you would have four people in your party or 5 or whatever, and the game would just introduce them to you, and you might be able to choose which ones came with you on adventures, but you were limited to 4 or 5 different characters, 6 or 7, 8, but only 3 or 4 at a time. Pokemon comes out, and suddenly your cast of you're not building a party, you're just collecting monsters. Instead of wandering around with heroes beating up monsters, you're just wandering around catching the monsters and making them fight each other. So it kind of turned it on its head, the idea of an RPG, because that opens up your cast. Instead of 10 characters or 6 characters, now you have hundreds of playable characters that could potentially join your team because all of the monsters are potential allies. And that brings with it this whole theory crafting of elemental weaknesses and hit points and breeding and attack and defense and all these values. It was a lot more math and tactical than RPGs had been previously, which opened it up to this is where the Game Boy cable came out. So you could link yourself with another Game Boy, duel your friends, and this whole kind of underground Pokemon master sort of thing came out of it. And does it stand the test of time? Well, Tokyo just opened up a Pokemon gym based off of the gyms in the game. You can actually walk in there and people will challenge you to Pokemon battles. So it's definitely got cultural staying power and relevance.
That's a good point. And it was one of the first successful, and I know this was done other places, like Nintendo Power had its own comic book series on Metroid and whatnot, but first successful cultural phenomenon through a cartoon. So they marketed across subjects.
It got to the point where Pikachu became more recognizable than Mickey Mouse in heyday. Yeah. So I would say that it stands the test of time. It was a game changer, and it certainly adds to the conversation.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I hadn't even considered that one. Another one through this era was Warcraft 2. So I was looking at RTSs and when those became big. Warcraft 1 came out, Orcs vs. Humans, not that big. It was out on CD-ROM. I remember I played it after the fact. But Warcraft 2 was widely disseminated, had a huge fan base, and it still does. There's still people playing Warcraft 2 Battle.net right now, which is weird. I looked it up.
Yeah, I had a hard time. I had StarCraft. I was looking at Warcraft 2 and StarCraft. I went with StarCraft, but I could have gone either way.
Yeah, it's tough to say. And I think the reason why I put Warcraft 2, because I thought about putting Warcraft 3, because it had a great storyline. It had an expansion, which is another cool thing, and it introduced an avid online RTS competitive edge. So it really had more bang for your buck. But Warcraft 2 did get Battle.net, and you could fight directly to people's computers, and for some reason people really picked up on that. You could tile into someone's. Remember if you remember that where you could dial directly into someone's modem,
your dial-up modem.
Yeah. And so Warcraft 2 had put that on there, and also because I think it did things that the was not intended. People started building towers, like lines of towers with farms in front of them. So you couldn't get to them without destroying the farm, and you had to tell the AI what to do. It clearly didn't even know to attack those things. So I put that in there because I felt like it was a game changer. I think it took the developers by surprise. They expected no one to really even use the dial-in function, and then people did so crazily that they made BattleNet, which is now huge, and it drew a lot of people in. It's what got me into RTSs.
Yeah, I would say that's a good match, and that brings us into the N64 era, where I would put Mario 64 as a game changer.
Who wouldn't put that on there?
Right,
you have to be a monster.
It was a launch title, so everybody played it. If you had an N64, usually I think it came with the system, or at least was one of the only games out when it came out. So it seems like everybody had Mario 64, and the first 3D adventuring platformer.
Yeah, besides video game or PCs.
Yeah,
but the first successful one. There were games like that on the PC, but yeah,
this is the game that. Like everybody goes back and references this game. Like the play control holds up to this day. Like the wall jumps and the triple jumps and just everything about that game still runs so smoothly.
Yeah, well, there was Pilot Wings, which is 3D.
It's still the standard that other 3D platformers kind of measured themselves against. And
for sure.
20 years later,
Lawnmower Man was another. You play Super NES?
Superman 64.
Yeah, that's so bad. So yeah, there were other ones, but yeah, they don't count. I don't feel that they count.
Yeah,
you're gonna get some hipsters, I'm sure, writing in and telling us we're dumb. But
because remember, it not only has to add to the conversation, but it needs to have longevity. It needs to last the test of time.
It has to do it well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely gonna put Mario 64. Also, this one came just a little bit later. It was right around this era, though. Maybe within 3 years. Thief.
Yes.
I was trying to think.
It's a big stealth game.
Yeah, I was trying to think about stealth games, which are really big, or they had their heyday for a while when all those Tom Clancy was coming out, Thief 2, Thief 3 came out. What other? Oh, Metal Gear Solid came out. All of these like sneaky games came out, but Thief predated them by all. I remember trying to describe the game, and I played a lot of video games. I tried to describe the game, and I was telling people, and I was like, it's kind of like you've got a bow and arrow and you're killing people, but that's not the point. You actually don't want to kill people. And people are like, what's the point of the game? And I was like, to get stuff. And they're like, that's weird, but don't you want to shoot people? I'm like, I guess. Not really.
We got so immersed in that game.
Yeah, I was like, if you can get out without ever hitting anyone, that's actually the best. And they're like, that doesn't sound like a game. I'm like, it kind of is. But I think it opened that stealth combat, the light indicator, and it really sucked you in.
Yes. My next choice for this era, no surprise here, Crash Bandicoot. I'm just kidding. No, I was gonna say Star Fox 64.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, that makes sense.
This really was not the first fly in one line shooting space game, but it was the first I know of that would have missions with all-terrain mode where you could go fully three-dimensional, and it to this day is one of those games that you can go back and play. And Do a Barrel Roll became such a cultural meme that we'd be remiss not to include it as an influential title.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, that was one where you could fight one-on-one, right? You could do that there, right? Could you have dog battles there, or was that the next one? Star Fox 64. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you could have multiplayer dogfights.
Yeah, so that really opened up that. It was almost like GoldenEye in that sense. You know, you haven't been able to dogfight your friends in any other game previously that I know of,
right?
In a 3D environment.
Which that and a few other things edged it up over the Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. For me, what made it hit that list for me?
Well, the next one, again, I was concentrating a lot on computer games. At this time, I was just getting in. I started making money because I was like 16, 17, 18, 19, something around there in this era. And I started buying all my own games. So this was less of what my parents got me and my friends had than me selecting things. But Grand Theft Auto came out. I didn't know which one to put. Maybe 3. I only say that because it was the reason why it was noteworthy at the time and why it is, I think, now, is because when you play it, I described it like this: you can do anything you want in a real world setting, like pretty truly sandbox in a conservative sense. It's not like Disney Infinity where you can do anything you want and build things, but you really could just go murder people on the side of the street. Not like in Carmageddon where that was the point of the game, but in a, it was weird. You got cops called on you, and then you could outrun them. It felt like you really could do anything you wanted, and it brought a lot of people a lot of concern. No other game had done that before, where they were like, "There's this game, Grand Theft Auto, you can run over pedestrians and run over hookers," and people that were stupid back then got really concerned about that. And some people still do. You can run over hookers, and they get upset because of the feminism thing. But I'm like, well, that's not the point of the game. You're actively, but you're penalized when you do that because cops come after you like they do in the real world, but they go away, not like they do in the real world. But anyway, I thought that one was a big one because a lot of people talked about it. It was another one of these violence ones that came about, but it wasn't inherent. Like the game was kind of inherently violent, but the levels of violence people were doing were the ones that the game actively punished. So by sending out, tanks, cops, and helicopters, all kinds of things after you. So it was interesting. You could openly fire on the cops. It was just strange.
Nice. Well, I've got a few kind of honorable mentions. I'm not sure if I'd put them on the list of classics, but you could argue that they deserve a spot. Okay. Do you have any more that you definitely would include?
Yeah, I've got two possible ones.
Okay, so let's go through our possible ones now. My first one is Zelda 64. I think it did for Zelda what Mario 64 did for Super Mario Brothers, and that it took a tried and true concept and made a seamless transition into 3D. And it's also a very influential game as far as cultural significance. It tends to be, I don't think it's the best Zelda game by a long shot, but a lot of people will list that as their favorite Zelda game.
Yeah, that was a great one. And you start off as a kid and you grow up into a human.
Yeah,
human.
That's true, though. Kids are subhumans.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that one. I put Diner Dash. Casual gaming is a massive chunk of the market right now. Yeah. And Diner Dash really did open that up. It was
Diner Dash and Farmville were kind of like open the floodgates on that.
I hate Farmville so much I didn't mention it. But and also Diner Dash predated Farmville. So I liked it. Diner Dash is what honestly got my wife into gaming. It was what gotten a lot of her friends into gaming, is because it was this time management thing, which for some reason played into something that nobody had really done so explicitly before.
Nice.
It was pretty fun. And even though the game mechanic was so simple, it was addicting.
Nice. My next one that I was kind of iffy on, but I might include Halo. I think Halo was very influential for modern first-person shooters. The idea of taking cover, recovering your shields, a lot of the controls of having two joysticks. Halo was one of the first to introduce that control scheme and that gameplay style.
That's funny. I was thinking about the same thing. Gears of War, I didn't put that on my list even as maybes because it had the cover system, which now is almost in every single shooter, third person or first person. But I didn't feel that it brought so much to the space that I would put as a classic.
Right.
Because otherwise, it was an alien shooter, and it was pretty brotastic. So, I mean, I liked it. I loved playing it. But this was cool. The level design. Remember, we played it, and one of us was sniping, and the other person was like, we do bounding movement, which you actually do in the military.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
And my last kind of iffy one was Metroid Prime. The idea of taking an adventure sort of Metroidvania game and putting it into a first-person shooter, and then on top of that, getting to use the Wiimote as a controller with Metroid Prime 3. Like one of those games could be a contender as a classic.
Oh, that's a good point. My last one was World of Warcraft because of MMOs.
Okay. Oh yeah, I can't believe I overlooked that. That's definitely an influential game.
Yeah, but it's so modern, and also MMOs are kind of dying right now, or MMORPGs at least.
So we don't know if it's standing the test of time. Once we get that's my other thing with Metroid Prime. The GameCube is almost too modern at this point to really be considered a classic by the definition I'm working from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and World of Warcraft, the reason why it was so successful was because it was so accessible, but yet there was a high skill cap. And so you could play with people like your wife who wasn't a gamer yet. Back then, there wasn't a lot of women gamers. So they'd have this low barrier to entry. They were able to come play and do regular quests and things. And the husband, let's say he's a big gamer, would be out there, at the battlegrounds fighting, testing his mettle. It appealed to so many different people. And while those statements are sexist today, those were not back then. This is from data that we had. Women just had almost no access to video games. And so World of Warcraft helped introduce them. I know a lot of hardcore gamers nowadays that got started on World of Warcraft. My wife did, actually.
Right.
She played Diner Dash, but this was the first game she sat down and would ask me to play.
She first started becoming a competitive kind of gamer, too.
Yeah, and she was asking me to play, or I'd come in and catch her playing games. I'm like, what are you doing? This is great. So I think had such wide appeal, and it introduced that we can spend serious money on our hobby, which had never really been done before. Yes, it would a discrete amount. You would spend people are like, well, I paid $300 for the 3DO or something. And I'm like, well, yeah, but how much did you spend in World of Warcraft over 5 years or 10 years?
Right.
Hundreds of thousands if you bought anything. But yeah, it's a lot. So I feel that, and it was a cultural explosion enough that, we had celebrities marketing for it, which had not been done before. So, nice. Yeah, I mean, besides like Shaq Fu and stuff, I don't really count that.
Right. Shaq Fu is definitely a cultural capstone.
I mean, good games that are marketed by. So.
Cool. Well, that's the end of my my nominees for the official classical canon of video games.
Yes, me too.
So interesting topic. It's kind of fun to think. We've talked about this on a previous episode, kind of like if we were teaching like a school curriculum, which games we would include on that. But just to look at it through the lens of if this is how we decide Moby Dick's a classic and Twilight isn't, can we apply that to video games? And turns out that a lot of it overlaps.
Yeah, and it was cool to be able to look at things at a more critical angle rather than games I just really liked. Like I didn't add Chrono Trigger because I felt that the RPG section was probably better represented by FF3, but after your arguments, I'm like, oh well, maybe FF1, and then maybe Chrono Trigger,
right? And I didn't really care for Halo, but I cannot deny that it would fit the criteria that we were discussing as far as influential and game changing.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't get added in some of my favorites like Battletoads because it just didn't do that much in the space. So yeah, I thought this was good.
Nice. So if you guys can think of any games that we forgot that should be classics, that should join the canon is open. It's not closed canon. So feel free to add your suggestions to the Facebook page, email us at thegametheorypodcast@gmail.com, or leave your comments wherever you like to leave comments.
Yes. Or you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/GameTheoryPod. I'm sorry, Game Theory Pod. Or you can well, that's all. You can email. Oh yeah, join the Facebook page at Facebook.com/thegametheorypodcast.
We have gotten a little feedback there. We had some feedback on our interview episodes with Michelle and with Eric Zimmerman. So basically, both guests knocked it out of the park. Mason says that he hasn't even watched Supernatural or Wear Plaid, but he's interested in following her on the Plaidcast, so that's fun. And we got a lot of good feedback on Eric as well, Professor Zimmerman.
Yeah, it was quite good. Additionally, if anyone's a fan of Patton Oswalt, which I am, I think you guys hilarious. You know Patton Oswalt, right, David?
Yeah.
Yeah, guy's hilarious, and he's a out and right nerd, which I like a lot because them's my boys. He went during the Republican debate. I've been watching all the debates on all sides, and during the GOP debate, he tweeted out. He started going on fire all of a sudden. He was like, what? Because they brought fantasy football. I don't know if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And people were like, fantasy football, what the hell? And so he's like, oh, F this. I'm going to say what everybody's character class was and their statistics in there. So like some of the examples was, he said Ben Carson was a level 19 necromancer with a 4 wisdom and a vampiric, that was Carly Fiorina, which was level 5 drow elf with a +1 ring of vampiric regeneration. Because she looks a little bit older, but she's still kind of hot. So those kind of things. It's pretty fun if you like RPGs. You may want to go look at it. And it's equally unfair to everyone. I feel like you probably would have done this to Democrats too. So it's fun.
Mason wants to remind us that it is National Game Design Month. So in November, it's like National Novel Writing Month, but for game designers. So if you want to make your own campaign setting, design your own classes, make your own modules, whatever you do, this is the month to really stop talking about it and start doing it. Yeah.
That's pretty much it. So thanks for all the feedback, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week on the Game Theory Podcast.